This video is sponsored by Skillshare, which is a site containing thousands of classes on creative topics like animation, music production and crafts, created by masters of their field. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a free premium membership trial. As a YouTuber, I have approached video editing in one particular way, and now armed with that knowledge, I find it even more interesting to visit guides on video editing, told by people who learned about it in a different way. For instance, I watched a guide on making a short film by a filmmaker called Olaf. Even though he films with real cameras, I've been able to apply his teachings to the digital world, which is where I record stuff. Skillshare makes it easy to review the credentials of the person you're watching, and it is reassuring to know that you're learning from somebody who knows what they're doing, and who has had success in their profession. That itself is inspiring. The site has a number of free classes, but for $15 a month or $99 a year, you'll be given unlimited, ad-free access to everything. Link in this video's description. Thinking about the map Aztec makes me feel nostalgic. And oh so old. In my mind, it will always be a part of Counter-Strike. If a player claimed not to know that map, I'd think they were trolling. And yet many of today's players won't have played Aztec, because the map hasn't been in the game for over 3 years now. Not since 2017. And since that time, the game's player base has doubled. So while it's hard to know for sure, it could be that more than half of the game's current player base has never even heard of the map Aztec. Which is terrifying to me, since it's so embedded within my memories for the game. When I go to start a new match, I half expect to still see it there on the map list. So for those of you who don't know Aztec, it was set in a jungle amidst a load of tombs and pyramids, which I would assume were made by the Aztecs. If that sounds familiar, that's because it also describes a new map that's just been added to the game, called Ancient. This is a map made by Valve, and while it isn't Aztec, it's obvious it's intended as a follow-up to that map. There are so many reasons for why it is that I'm certain of it, even without an official statement from Valve about it. It's not just because the theme's the same. It features the same wooden bridge, the same style of pyramids, even the same textures and patterns, but with a high-definition makeover. Loading up the map in the editor, it even uses the exact same colours for the sun and ambient lighting as Aztec did. And the map's skybox is called High Resolution Aztec. Through their actions, it's been made clear that Ancient is the new Aztec, and if you want the old one instead, then you'll have to remake it using the new textures and props, or simply to download the old one off the workshop again. But I'm fascinated by why they chose to do this. Every diffuse map in the game since release has received a facelift, so it makes sense for Aztec to get the same high-definition treatment. But then, why bother remaking so many of Aztec's textures and props so faithfully if they didn't intend to remake the map itself? Did they get halfway through remaking it before changing their minds about it? Or did they never intend to remake Aztec? In which case, why limit themselves so much by sticking to the exact same stuff? Was it all done to free Valve of the burden of Aztec, by letting them work on a new map whilst giving the community the assets required to remake Aztec for themselves if they did so wish? And this is what I'll be investigating today. How possible would it be to remake Aztec with the new assets, and what would that look like? To do this, I decided to try and remake it, not because I thought I could do it, but more because I wanted to know how I was going to fail. So let this be a warning to you if you're considering remaking Aztec with the new Aztec assets. There are 2 ways you can remake Aztec. The first is to keep the map as is, but to swap the old textures and assets for the new ones. This is the lazy way, and definitely not how you're supposed to do it. It's what I did, and let me warn you now, it ends up looking disjointed. A bizarre mix of old and new. What you should be doing instead is to reimagine the map, and this takes a lot more time and effort. For this, you should look at each room individually, see how it used to be like, and to try and imagine how it could be remade today to best utilise the new textures and assets. Take the watery underpass, for example. It would not be made like this today. It would not have these primitive looking sloped ceilings. It wouldn't have flat looking walls. It doesn't matter if you give it a higher resolution texture or Source 2 props, it still won't look as good as a place from Ancient, which has been built from the ground up with the new assets in mind. If you really want to see how Aztec could look with Ancient's new assets, then check out Ancient itself. Look at how everything seems to pop out from the surfaces they're on, whilst also blending in so well with the rest of the surface. Looking at each of these locations, they're absolutely beautiful. It's just a shame they function as nothing more than empty, boxy rooms. The reason why these newer maps look better is because so much of them is now made of models. Proper models, created in a specialised program and then ported into Counter-Strike. The older method was to use the tools in CSGO's editor, by piecing objects together out of blocks and displacements. Using models isn't a new technique, it's as old as the Source engine itself. Let's go all the way back to Counter-Strike Source, since the Aztec map for that game was released even before Half-Life 2 was. This is a map made almost entirely out of blocks. This looks like a crate, but if you look closely enough, it's actually just a block with a texture on it. Sus. It's actually easier just to say what is a prop. The tank is, the ferns are, the lights are, and so are the oil drums. But everything else has been made out of blocks and displacements by the mapper, rather than a modeler. And that's why it looks rubbish. Fast forward 8 years to Aztec for CSGO and a lot has changed. The majority of it is still made out of blocks and displacements, but anything you'd consider to look nice, like the plants, this cracked block above the walkway here, and even these crates, and these, are models. But not these are still just blocks. That's the difference that 8 years has made. And now fast forward another 8 years to Ancient, and it's become even more model focused. Now, pretty much every surface is either a model or has models sticking out of them. Using the console command rdrawStaticProp0 reveals what it would look like without models, and it is not a pretty sight. And neither's this site. I personally don't like the new way of making maps. I appreciate that it's the future, and I acknowledge it makes maps look better, but it's taken away the joy I used to have for mapping. I loved having complete control over my own level, taking the project through from start to finish without having to rely on anybody else, and being able to do so within a matter of days or weeks. But if I want to take mapping seriously today, I'll need to work with other people. I'll need an artist and 3D modeler, and we'll need to continually go back and forth with them throughout the map's development, which could span months, or even longer. And when I've tried to explain this to people in the past, it's fallen on deaf ears. It's clear that a lot of people just see the goal of mapping as being to create the most incredible looking level ever, and if you're not aiming for that, then you failed in some way as a mapper. But for me, it was about the process of converting a thought of mine into a place for others to explore, and it always amazed me that something I created could still surprise me with its look and feel. But this is why Valve's remade levels are so awesome, because they give mappers all sorts of high quality textures and models to use in their own levels. But even if you've already got all of the assets needed to make your level, it's still a lot more work than the older method was, and a lot more restrictive. Because when you're dealing with props, you have less freedom with where you place them. A tree in Ancient might be made up of 3 or 4 different assets. You'll have the roots, you'll have the branches, you'll have another for the vines that drape down from it. Then you might have another for the ivy climbing up the trunk. A lot of these props are designed to slot together in a very specific way. You can't just sprinkle them around on your level and expect for it to look good. You almost have to be developing your map around these props instead. Luckily, Valve has provided us with a special prefab map called Ancient Zoo. There was a time when this sort of thing would have been a welcome bonus, but when you're dealing with a map with this level of complexity, it's all but required to make sense of it. What Ancient Zoo is a collection of all of the different textures and props from the map, and with examples of how they could all be pieced together to make more elaborate structures. Even a seemingly simple bit of wall could be made from a dozen different parts. Take this stone mound, for instance. You've got the base layer, which itself is a displacement which allows for smooth or realistic transition between 2 different textures. Then you've got the trims around the outside, and then you've got the extra stones to stick out of the displacement bit in the middle to make it look bumpier. But these props have to be placed very specifically over the displacement, otherwise the rock placement won't match up. The placement of assets is a lot more pre-planned than it used to be. With enough time and effort, you can make your own structures out of these individual parts. At the back of Zoo is this grand structure comprising of 519 separate parts, to really show what's possible if you were to take the time to combine the pre-made assets together in a convincing manner. You can see this building here in its entirety, then another one of it in front of that, but this time in a ruined state, showing how flexible these models are if you take the time to arrange them properly. Then in front of this one is something quite interesting. They've combined the building together into just one single, lower detail object. Parts that were previously 3D are now all combined together in a blobby or flat manner. You wouldn't use this inside your level, but might somewhere far out in the distance where people won't notice the limited detail. Anyway, that's what you're given if you'd like to remake Aztec with Ancient's assets. So, onto my effort. I tried replacing some of the stuff in Aztec with Ancient's pre-made assets just to see what it would look like. Here you go. Aztec, Ancient. Aztec, Ancient. And the thing that stood out to me was that these new textures are a lot less colourful. This one is clearly a high-definition version of the one seen in Aztec, but the green has become a lot more muted, brown even. So while it may look clearer when you're staring right at it, from a distance it doesn't look quite so appealing. But then if you look at Ancient, that's what that map is like. It's not vivid yellows and greens. Everything is just a shade of brown. It's a bit odd, really. I would say that Counter-Strike has become more cartoony in recent years, especially with the newer character models and the other map remakes, which are all a lot more vivid and colourful than the older ones were. But Ancient's theme is more muted and realistic than Aztec's bright, colourful appearance was. So that's something to bear in mind if you're thinking of remaking Aztec. And the same has happened to the water. Aztec has an iconic, murky brown colour, but replacing it with Ancient's makes it clearer and less visible. There's definitely more to this new water texture than meets the eye. If you see how it's used in the map Ancient, it looks perfectly acceptable, and even has a flow map to allow for realistic movement on the surface, with the water appearing to travel from the waterfall around the bridge support and through the tunnel towards B. The water around the edges, away from the current, looks almost still in comparison. But again, it is a very different style to the one seen in Aztec. The next difference I found was to the vegetation. There are definitely new versions of the trees and shrubs seen in Aztec, but they function very differently. In Aztec, a tree is a hefty looking thing that can cover and obstruct a large area of your screen. Just look at the size of this tree trunk. The ones in Ancient might be the same species, but their trunks are thinner and their canopy often a lot less dense. Don't get me wrong, they're much more detailed, especially when viewed up close, but to get the same effect from the new props requires a lot more of them. But this is how times have changed. Back in 2012, you'd fill an area with 4 or 5 trees and that would be it. Done. And done with as few polygons as humanly possible, given the jungle environment. Compare this with the areas surrounding Ancient and they're a lot more elaborate. The trees aren't there to obstruct your view, but merely to contribute towards a pretty scene. So this would be something to consider when replacing Aztec's props for Ancient's. You'll have to use more of them to get the same amount of bulk. But just because Ancient is more elaborately detailed, it doesn't mean they haven't tried to optimise it. Before watching this next bit of the video, I suggest you run about the map Ancient and try to find examples of low quality scenery, because you probably won't be able to find them. Yet go into no clip, and the moment you step beyond the playable area, the props quickly drop in quality. Just meters away are basic cut-out shrubs, and further away still are entirely two-dimensional rows of shrubs and trees. It's testament to the skill of Valve's mappers that you just don't notice this in practice, because when you know what you're looking for, it becomes blindingly obvious that huge shortcuts have been used. Also, fun fact, I don't think there's a single blade of grass in Ancient. There are shrubs, vines and leaves, but no grass. There's grass on the old Aztec, so if you're remaking it, you'll either have to keep the old props in or find some alternative decoration instead. While there's no way I was going to remake the entire level, I did spend a few hours on these two places. Like I said, this isn't the best it could look, merely what it looks like if swapped out for Ancient's prefab structures. And with the plants in particular, I really abused the scale feature to make them big enough to serve as replacements for whatever it used to be like. Bombsite B just looks a bit bland now that the ground and the structure are roughly the same shade. Before, you can see the difference that having green grass and a yellow structure made. If we look at Ancient's Bombsite B, things aren't made that much better, though the vertical wall around the site does at least separate the structures from the playable space a bit better. On the near side, I've swapped out the scaffolding, foliage and rocks for the more modern equivalents, and it's okay, though again I miss Aztec's more vibrant colour scheme. One bit I do think looks better is the distant scenery, thanks to the higher quality tree models and the larger distant pyramid, which gives more sense of scale to the world. Just a shame I hid it behind the mossy building. Oh well. Now let's move on to the second area, just outside of T's spawn. Again, I've swapped the textures and props for Ancient's equivalents. I definitely appreciate the higher resolution textures on the structure and cliff here, and I think, unlike Bombsite B, I've managed to improve upon the original's colour scheme in this area, with the whiter bricks helping to make the structure stand out against the background better than before. I had fun with the new texture blending just here, blending between a rocky texture and some kind of mural, with a few 3D rocks placed over the top to finish off the makeover. I swapped the 2D cross texture with a more modern looking 3D model, and the plant dangling down here has been made up of higher quality textures. The old one was just a single prop, while the new one is about 5 different parts placed together. With this you get more flexibility to customise its appearance, but it's also a lot more work to deal with. And I do think the new prop placement of the shrubs and ferns appears more natural than the spam of these weird vine things did previously. I also added more distant trees since I felt the background of Aztec was too sparse to feel like a jungle before. This tunnel was a bit of an experiment for me. The new, lighter bricks work against me here because where they meet the muddy ground looks like a less natural transition, which is why for most of the walls around here I used a darker brick pattern instead, which transitions into moss further down. I do like the new root models, which you can see I spammed the underside of the tunnel with, and I decorated those diagonal supports with brick trims, which doesn't go together brilliantly, but you can at least see what I'm getting at here. The experiment here was how to decorate where the ground meets the walls. This 2D row of ferns looks absolutely terrible, but I kept it in just to show you how not to do it. Further along there's another 2D row of plants, but it's masked by lots of higher quality fern and rock models in the foreground. It's not practical to use this many models in such a small area, plus they'll lead to problems with visibility, like if a player drops a weapon here or crouches up against the wall. Here is the same sort of thing, but using low quality models, which are only really intended for use outside of the playable space. From this angle they look kind of okay in my opinion, giving the illusion of lots of plant life without impacting performance so heavily, but when you stand above them and look down, you can see the compromises made by using these lower quality assets. And here I just threw a few leafy models at the ground and left it at that. But I think I actually prefer the result here since there's less to go wrong with it. Just for comparison, here's how Ancient treats the edges of spaces. When you look for it, you'll realise how little detail there is in these parts of the map normally. If I had more time, I would have liked to have decorated one of the interior rooms of the map as well, but then why bother with that when Ancient already shows us what they would have looked like? And last of all, I rendered the same map but with slightly different sun colours and direction, which I thought made this part of the map look a bit more flattering. So yeah, if I managed these changes in just a few hours, imagine what could be done by somebody bothering to do it properly. Why didn't Valve bother to remake Aztec themselves? I think it's because the map had some serious balancing issues. What normally happened was that CTs would stock up on sniper rifles and then would lock down the few routes that terrorists had to choose between. There was a time in Counter-Strike's past when this was a lot of fun, but given the rise of competitive play and increasingly elaborate strategies, maybe it just wasn't worth Valve's time to try and remake what could be seen as just a casual map, and that by the time they had made enough changes to it to make it balanced again, they might as well have just made another map instead. Like Ancient. Like I said earlier, if people want Aztec back badly enough, then they can just use the version on the workshop, or to remake it themselves if they really wanted to. Maybe it's the nostalgia talking, but to me, Ancient doesn't feel as iconic as Aztec was. Sure, it's pretty, but that doesn't change the fact that Ancient is just a series of generic, boxy rooms and polished, gameplay-driven corners. Aztec, on the other hand, felt like more of a unique experience, with its dark waterways, daring bridges and exposed open platforms. None of this made it good as a competitive map, but it was an experience. There wasn't another map quite like it. And for all its flaws, it does still have its fans. So who knows, perhaps one day we'll see a high-quality, community-developed remake of the map.